but just give you a quick background on me. I live in Oklahoma City now. I've moved around a lot, but I'm currently a curator at the American Banjo Museum because tenor banjo is kind of how I got started into all this. I played with a lot of Dixieland trad jazz bands when I was a kid in Houston and New Orleans, and just fell in love with that style. I honestly thought I wasn't a good musician when I was a kid because I was exposed to traditional piano lessons that, and no offense to my teacher, bless her, but she made it feel kind of like a chore. It just felt like something I did not want to do. So I did piano for 3 or 4 years and just didn't like it. Then tried to learn 6-string guitar on my own. My grandpa bought me a $100 like a Walmart guitar with action so high you could roll a bowling ball under the strings. It was bad. So I thought, I'm just not cut out for music. That's not my thing, So later, I was homeschooled for a little while, and we had this big co-op that would meet, and you had different elective classes you could take, like culinary stuff or foreign languages or chemistry, origami, and I blew off the music thing, but eventually I had to get a music credit to pass out of this thing. And the only option at the time was the recorder. So I was like, and my wife is a flutist, so now I'm like, sorry. But I did not want to play recorder. And then eventually they hired a guy who was an amazing ukulele player, old-time tenor banjo player. Who really learned from all the original vaudeville guys in the 20s and teens and all that. And that was the first time, it was in the ukulele class, normal ukulele tuning. That was the first time I had been exposed to this concept where you can just kind of have fun and just play like a couple chords and strum, sing. It wasn't all a bunch of black ink on the page and, a lot of theory. So that really eased me into it. I had a lot of fun. He was big on using your ear, not being totally locked into just having sheet music all the time. So I was about 12 then, and really got into the ukulele. So after the eight-week course was over, he said, you caught on pretty well. And he said, would you like to learn something bigger? I said, sure. What do you got? And of course, you could learn guitar. I said, I've tried that. He said, you could learn bass. I said, well, And he said, or I play banjo. Of course, I didn't know there was 5-string banjo, and I just said banjo, and I thought that'd be kind of cool, banjo. Why not? So, anyways, he gives me at the time, one of his banjos. It was a Vega Vox 4. Lowell know what I'm talking about. It was in the shop getting worked on. So his other banjo he was using, he's like, unfortunately, I don't have a banjo right now. I do have a tenor guitar I can let you borrow. So technically, the first thing I ever touched in fifths was a tenor guitar. And then a few weeks later, he found a little Orpheum No. 2 17-fret banjo for me to play. But once I got that, I thought, man, I kind of wish I had that tenor guitar again because it was like an old TG50. It played great, But anyways, that's how I got started in all this and really took to it quickly. He gave me free lessons. The deal was I had to play gigs with him for free. And I thought he was the one getting the bad end of the deal, But from day one, I was performing usually little banquets and Rotary clubs and Lions clubs and things like that. But having to just go out there, no matter how much I thought I sucked, and just play, and no music, And looking back on that, I really think that helped my development pretty quickly. The other thing he had was this large, you're going to laugh at this because some people call it the definition of hell, but it's a banjo band. So there's like 60 people playing tenor banjo in a room together. But that was another pivotal thing. I was the only kid. Everybody, this is back in the mid-90s, they were all in their 70s, 80s. We had a couple people in their 90s. And they all we did have music. So that's kind of where I learned to read music. So we had melody, harmony, rhythm, and a bass player, guitar player, and a little drummer. But that's kind of so my other interest besides playing music is in vintage instruments. And being around 60-something people with, a lot of them had some money and they had several really nice tenor banjos. So I'd kind of learn, those are Gibsons and these are Vegas and Paramounts and whatever, and that was always a highlight for me, was just getting to look at all these different instruments. And then after that, I started playing in Branson. I do a lot of the shows for like when they have an intermission for like the Jim Stafford show, I did that. Shoji Tabuchi and all that stuff, Lawrence Welk Theater and all that. So I kind of got a taste of just, it wasn't much, but it was a little bit of showbiz early, and I really liked it. And I thought, well, maybe I could turn this into make it my living one day. And then my mentor, so I was pretty much self-taught after that first year, but I ran into a guy named Buddy Wachter, who's like a really, if you haven't heard of him, you should look him up. He's like easily, in my opinion, the best that's ever lived. And we became friends, and I never really had lessons with him, but we'd have phone calls, and we'd talk for hours about who to listen to, who not to listen to, how to, practice with a metronome and technique, and a lot of this stuff that I'll tell you today came from him, basically. And he produced my first, record and up in Baltimore. And anyway, so he did tell me, he said, I hate to tell it to you, kid, but the instrument you're playing is going to be really hard to make a living on. Tenor banjo, maybe in the 1920s or even in the pizza parlor days of the 50s or 60s. But there's no shakies anymore. There's no, So he said, you might learn another instrument. And so I was at his house up in Baltimore, and he had an old K upright bass in the corner. And he said, you mess around with this, So I got really into bass. I just really love bass. I just enjoy the foundation, and I kind of like it that you're not always in the limelight, like you're more of a supportive role. So I got into classical bass a lot, and in high school I was going to originally go to the University of North Texas for classical double bass studies, and then at the last minute I changed my mind and switched to jazz studies. So I got to study with a guy named Lynn Seaton, who played with Count Basie, and he's from New York, and he played with everybody, Bill Evans, all those guys. So that really helped me get more into modern jazz. And then I'd kind of take a lot of that stuff I was learning through the bass and apply it to banjo, believe it or not. Or then later I found, wow, the tenor guitar is a much better voice for this kind of jazz. And so I'd start playing B3 trios and stuff in Austin, San Antonio, but using a tenor guitar instead of a 6-string guitar. So I got really into like early Wes Montgomery stuff and Benson and all the, McDuff and all the different B3 stuff. I was really into that for a while. So anyways, the reason I'm telling you all this is if you listen to my playing, you might hear a few different genres that creep in. The last of which, I played bass for Ray Price, the country singer, for about 8 years. And I got to learn a lot about traditional country music. So that's influenced my playing too a little bit. But I know the workshop today is primarily about jazz, as John said, jazz improvisation. So John Halavanek, and he wrote this really amazing description of what I was supposed to teach you. I said, wow, that was really well worded. I have to live up to that, I guess. But the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to go through a few bullet points here up front, and but I really want this to be kind of an open forum too. So any question you have about anything at all, feel free to ask. So before we get into all this, I'll just play a tune for you, just to kind of give you an idea of what I like to do. And this is fifths tuning. This one is in C. For a while I played in low F tuning, because it usually, with these instruments, a lot of times they're lacking that lower bass string, and I feel like they don't project as much. And then I'd go back and forth between F, C, G, D, and then C, G, D, A. And this one currently is in C, G, D, A. But let's see. It's a lot of banjo stuff, right? Need more coffee. Anyway, so with the tenor banjo, you learn a lot of right hand, wristy kind of stuff. But then if you start playing the tenor guitar, you know, you don't want to sound like a 1920s, I mean, that was probably not the greatest song to demonstrate that on, because it is a 19-teen song, actually. But I was having a hard time getting away from all my banjo stuff all the time, so I started to listen to more, mainly early Wes Montgomery, and Django Reinhardt. That was kind of a nice segue between the 20s stuff into the little bit more modern sounding stuff. So my first advice to anybody wanting to learn how to improvise better in a jazz setting is to listen a lot, to listen to the good recordings, you know, good players. I think one that's really, and also don't get stuck on just guitar. I mean, we play tenor guitar, so there's not a lot of recordings to listen to of tenor guitarists. But it's easy to think, well, I'm only going to listen to guitarists. But I would start out listening to Louis Armstrong solos, as they're really melodic and accessible to figure out by ear. Just in like over a blues, you know, nothing crazy. Just start with a blues and really get an idea what he's doing, shaping lines around the chord changes. I think that's really important too, to always have a running, almost like the commercials you used to see with the little bouncing dot over the lyrics. You know, it's like you always need to know where you are in the form and what chord changes you're on at any given time. At least for me, it's you know, I don't need a piece of paper in front of me telling me the chords, because I'm seeing them in my mind. And over time, you learn that all these songs are really similar, you know, so there's not a need to think of them as each song is a unique, you know, song to itself. They all share a lot of the same chord changes and progressions. I mean, how many times have you heard a song where the bridge comes up and it's exactly like, you know, 50 other ones, you know? So I think that's really important, is to focus on just simple, start really, really simple, and copy players that are accessible to copy at first and slowly work your way up. Don't start with Sonny Rollins or John Coltrane or Pat Martino. You know, kind of start with something you can, and even if it's just a couple little licks or ideas, I think it can be very overwhelming when you're trying to learn how to improvise in a jazz setting. By the way, jazz, that's a huge, I mean, you probably know this, but that can encompass a lot of different things. It could be 1920s jazz all the way up to, you know, Pat Metheny or something. I mean, it can be everything in between. But I personally had a lot of luck starting out with the 20s stuff, because it gives you a lot of experience playing over major chords, regular minor chords, and dominant 7 chords. You know, you don't even really play minor 7s much. I mean, you really learn the 3 kind of just basic chords. And once you learn how to improvise well over those, then you can start getting good at minor 7s and maybe some flat 5s. And you also see diminished chords a lot in that early music. And that's something later they would get rid of the diminished harmonies and modernize it by going to more of like a 4 minor or something. So that would be my recommendation if you've never, how many people have really never played like jazz on this? Like, yeah, is that right? It's kind of why you're here, right? So I would suggest, you know, just starting out, maybe going on YouTube or whatever, and just pulling up some old 20s kind of Dixieland trad jazz recordings. See if you can just play rhythm to them. And if you need to pull up a chart that has the chords, obviously at first, that's fine. But your goal should be, in my opinion, to not need that as soon as possible, and just start to develop it's your ear, but it's also your musical mind. You know, when you get lost, what happens? You know, don't freak out. Learn how to come back in, or just be aware that you got lost in the first place. You know, open up your ears. So And we'll get into some more, actual practical things for the tuning.
Tyler,
But yeah.
what about Texas swing?
Yeah, and that's very similar. Yeah, all the old Milton, Brownies, Bob Wills, all that stuff. Light Crust Doughboys, all those bands are great too. I mean, that's really Texas swing. All that music, I guess, was really pop music of the day. We kind of, it was regional. So the New Orleans jazz sounded one way, Southern jazz. And a lot of people don't think about it, but all the Texas swing, Western swing stuff, they were just jazz bands. I mean, they had full, saxes, trumpets. They would usually add violins or fiddles, and then eventually pedal steels and stuff. And then it kind of later, 40s or so, turned into something a little more concrete, But in the 20s and stuff, I was fortunate to study with a guy for a little while named Smokey Montgomery, who lived in the Dallas area, and he was the tenor banjoist for the Light Crust Doughboys was their name. And he had all these pictures of all the, it was so cool. I mean, he was amazing. But look them up, the Light Crust Doughboys, and because that's very much, it basically sounds like 1920s Dixieland, but with a little bit of a Texas Southern flair on it. And that's a good point, John. Those are really accessible styles to kind of ease your way into it. But it's all the same harmony, So yeah, that's a really good point. So the other thing is when you're listening to music, I like to separate it into two different types of listening: active listening and passive listening. Active would be like you really make a point, whether it's once a week, whatever, to sit down in front of a record, maybe have a notepad out or your iPhone or whatever, and really analyze what you're listening to. Maybe even also have your instrument there and just kind of really get in the zone, no distractions. I don't think enough people do that. We're so focused on just playing all the time. But if you really make listening, actively listening, analyzing, analytical listening a part of your practice regime, you'll get better a lot faster. But then the passive listening part is something else too. Like, what do you listen to if you mow the lawn or you're driving your car around, you're doing the dishes or whatever? What's playing? Is anything playing? Or when you go to sleep? I mean, I used to listen. I could never fall asleep without music playing. Now with being married, I don't want to annoy my wife, but I'll have my little earbuds in. You absorb a lot of that stuff, I think, subconsciously. So just it's like when we were talking about this, learning a new language. The best way to learn a new language is to immerse yourself in the culture, in the if you have that luxury. So why do we expect to get really good at a genre of music if the only time we're really doing is just once in a while jamming with some people or practicing by yourself for 30 minutes and getting distracted? You really have to just have the music, because you're going to pick up on all these little subtle cues, even if you're not doing it physically on your instrument. You're absorbing all that whether you think you are or not, just constantly. So anyways, active listening, where you're really concentrated, taking notes, maybe figuring some stuff out on the spot, and then just if your goal is to get better at jazz, start just having it play all the time in the background. You'll be surprised how much you pick up just from that. Another thing too is to play with other people regularly, because that's where you get to test out all this stuff. And I know not everybody has that luxury, but if you just have one other person you can play with once in a while, that does a lot of good, because it really forces you to, and somebody hopefully that's like maybe at your level, if you're lucky, maybe better than you. That's the best thing. The buddy told me, he's like, you always want to be the worst person in the band. And then once you rise to that occasion, find a different band and keep working your way up, But that's something, people get intimidated. When I teach lessons a lot, people come in and they'll say, it sounded so much better at home. I wish you could have heard it at home. And I'll say, yeah, okay. I said, tell you what, there is some truth to that. You get nervous around teachers and stuff. But I say, what's great is we have these little things. We can record ourselves now all the time. So I'll make you a deal. You go home, just one time the whole week, take a video of you playing it where it sounds really good, and you'll be cool. You won't have to play it for me in person. Nobody's ever done it. It's like just knowing that the camera's on and recording you makes you nervous. So, and then But that's a good way too to get over if you feel a little nervous, stage fright or whatever. Just recording yourself a lot is a great way to replicate that, because psychologically if you mess up, it's documented. You can't. I don't know. There's just something about it, So I'd highly recommend that too. And then also another great trick, while we have the phone thing, when we're talking about that, is when you're learning a song, because you hear this a lot. People say, well, I'm a melody player, I'm a lead player, or oh, I'm a rhythm, I'm a chord player. But really, even if you prefer to do one over the other, if you really want to learn songs, you really need to know the whole harmonic structure. And a great way to do that is to just take a simple tune, it could be a blues or a simple kind of 20s tune, and record your own rhythm track first. This isn't high quality. You can do it with your voice memo on your phone, in preferably having like a metronome, so you can learn what your tendencies are to rush or drag, But lay down your own rhythm track first, and then practice to that. A lot of people will use, and I'm not against Band in the Box or the iReal apps and all that. They'll use that to practice along with, but you can kill two birds with one stone by you recording your own backing track. It's just double the, you get more bang for your buck, and you learn the song better. Whenever you're trying to solo or whatever and you get lost, you just kind of know, once again, that running line of chords is there in your head, and you don't feel as scared when you get lost. But the metronome is a big deal. Now, I've done this a lot in these workshops, but I used to always practice with the metronome. Well, first of all, I didn't practice with the metronome for a long time. And then I'd listen back to some things I did, and I was like, oh man, I sped up a little bit there. I slowed, or I dropped a beat. Or, whoops, I didn't, I played an extra A section instead of going to the bridge. So just using a metronome, I'm not saying you have to do it all the time, but it's a great way to keep you honest and have something that's going to tell you when you don't, because music, to me, like if you had to make a definition of what is music, it's not just noise, it's organized noise. I mean, that's one way you can think of it. And the rhythm is arguably more important than the actual sounds anyways. You could have somebody banging on a can and you could call it music if it has an organization to it that makes you tap your foot and feel good. So I think we put too much focus on modes and theory and I got to learn this or use this pick or these strings or whatever, when we can't even have a nice feel. Can't even play quarter notes, just strumming. So I'm not trying to bash anybody, but that's what happened to me. I felt like, oh my gosh, I can't even get through one chorus of a song with nice time, So I started using the metronome on beats 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I'd cut it down to 1 and 3. And then eventually you learn to hear it on 2 and 4 when you're playing jazz. It's much more, it gives you that swing feel. And I'll show you a quick demonstration here. So, and you want to be the one that flips the beat. You don't want to set it up on your metronome. I'll show you what I mean. But back in the old days when you just had a regular metronome, you had to do that. Now you have all these apps where you can delete certain beats and all this. So it's kind of hard to hear. But so normally you'd hear this as the strong beat, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. But we want to hear this as 2 and 4. 2, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 4. 1, 2. See, I flipped it. So now it's the offbeat. If you're hearing this as 1 and 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That works in Latin music. Can work in Irish music. It can work in all kinds of genres. But what are we playing? We're playing swing, or we're playing jazz. And the thing that gives it that pulse, that swing, is that offbeat. So if you're trying to practice, well, I'll do Jada again, but this is 1, 2, 3. It's going to feel like I'm in a march or something, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's very, you're already setting yourself up to just not swing. So if I flip that, and a quick trick to do that, it's pretty hard. But if you just out loud say 2, 4, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now I'm on the offbeat. Automatically, I just feel like you can be a little more bouncy with the time. So that's a very simple little trick you can do just for jazz. You know, if you're practicing, try to get used to playing on 2 and 4 and learn how to flip that beat. You'll get fast at it the more you do it. The reason I say you want to do that on your own and not use the app to do it for you is because that's going to happen in a real world setting a lot, where people drop the beat and you'll have to adjust. And sometimes they don't know. And the last thing you want to do is go, hey, stop, you know, like, you know, you don't want the audience to know it happened, and you want to be the person that can slide back in, you know. So the more you practice doing that on your own, I think that's just better for a lot of reasons. Like I said earlier, a little bit theory, you know, theory is a good thing. It can help a lot, but I don't think it should ever supersede, you know, your ear and just playing stuff that sounds good to you. I mean, theory can explain why it sounded good. I mean, you have to remember, all these guys we're listening to, the jazz greats, they didn't have jazz school back then. I mean, everybody learned technique classically. I mean, not everybody, but most people learned, if you're playing saxophone, you learn classical fingerings. If you're playing double bass, I mean, that's all there was back then. So the theory stuff, and by that I mean modes and, you know, all this kind of conceptual stuff, was really kind of came around later to explain why what they all were playing worked, you know. So I'm not saying don't get into the theory, but don't let it intimidate you, because if you rush into it too soon, it is very overwhelming, you know, and it can cause you to not really stick with it. You go, jazz isn't for me, you know. The modes come up a lot. People say like, how many people are familiar with modes, you know, right? Yeah. It's kind of like the circle of fifths or all these other things. There's all these things people talk about, but when it comes to actually practically using them and playing, nobody really, I don't know, they don't really apply them well. The way I think of modes, how many, you know, have you heard of it where they explain it like, you know, if you start on a D to D, so let's say your C scale, right, is your primary Ionian mode. And if you move up one note, it's Dorian, and you move up another one, E to E is Phrygian. And that really confused me when I was getting into all that. And then I had a guy explain it to me like this. He said, you know, just think of the modes. Okay, everything's a major scale. You're just altering notes from the major scale. So think of Dorian as just a flatted third and a flatted 7. That's it. For any, it could be an F Dorian, it can be a B flat Dorian, D Dorian, C Dorian. You don't think of the piano thing. Just memorize Dorian equals flat third, flat 7. You know, Mixolydian is just a flat 7. It's what you play over a normal 7 chord. In fact, I used to always call it just a 7 scale. You know, I didn't know, but you know, if you're playing a G7, you don't want to play. Right? It's. And that's, later I learned that's called the G Mixolydian mode. So what you can do is loop a chord for practicing. Loop one chord over and over and over again and apply that scale and just improvise different patterns and things with you're only allowed to use those notes. Baron, would you mind quickly just playing just a G7 chord, just maybe, yeah. Just like that over and over again. So here's the mode I'm going to be using, or scale. Just a G7 scale, G Mixolydian scale, G major scale with a flat 7, whatever you want to think of it as. Same thing, right? So here's the scale. Right? Now, I'm going to try to improvise using only those notes. And some of it might not be very good at all, but it's a game. You're playing a game with yourself. So once you do that for a while, and do it a lot, and you really get familiar with that, maybe you go to a C7, then you go to an F7, then you go to a D7, you just do this over and over again. Once you feel really comfortable with, you don't have to do them all. You don't have to do D flat and A flat, just do a few to get the sound in your head. Then you start throwing in notes that aren't in the mode. So we call it chromaticism, which is a fancy term for 1 fret higher or lower than the note you're trying to go to. So same thing again. This time I'll just add some notes that aren't found in the scale or the chord. But we're not going to stay on them too long. It's like an unstable bond. You're trying to get to the note that sounds right. So 1, 2. So here's the basics. 1, 2, 3. Those are all, if you heard those kind of weird notes, we weren't staying on them long, but we were using them to get to other notes that sounded right. So once again, I don't want you to, when you're learning jazz, you don't want to just jump headfirst into like bebop or something. You want to just slowly start. What's the basics? The basic is just some scales, some ideas that work with the chords. Then you alter them a little bit. But what else? There's no right or wrong answer here, but what else did you notice maybe that wasn't note related about the playing I was trying to do there? Is there any, the other element we talked about before, there's rhythm, right? That's the most crucial thing of all. Right, and he was doing that, but the rhythm that I was playing, you want to sound like bum, ba 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 bum, da ba da ba ba dum, ba da ba da da. That's the most important part, because you could just play. Or just, right, but not. All that stuff is like how you talk. We're always talking about music as a language. Well, if we all talk like this all the time, and you have the same exact information coming out of my mouth, but it'd be really hard to, we have inflections, we have pauses where we, you can get loud, you can get soft. All that stuff is the same mindset you want to have in your playing. So a lot of it is you're almost answering each other rhythmically. And I'll give you an example. Same thing again, if you don't mind. Thank you. Big hand for bearing. Yeah. Right? So now I'm going to go the opposite way. I'm going to only play one note. But now I'm going to focus on just rhythm only and see if I can make it remotely interesting without playing anything but one note. 1, 2. Right? 2 notes. 3 notes maybe. 4 notes. And so on and so on. So it's not really you need both, right? But you can if you can just, anybody can practice on one note and see if you can make it somewhat interesting if all you had was rhythm. Drummers do it all the time. They don't have notes at all, but they can be really, That's the other thing too, when you're playing rhythm, think of yourself, not all the time, but think of yourself as almost like a drummer sometimes. Like if you're playing rhythm. Just practice. You can just block off the strings. You don't even need the chord. You can just, there's so much you can do. I think that's simple stuff that sets you up with a better foundation when you're ready to apply all the extra stuff to it. I think we're too quick to go all in and sound like the best jazz players in the world tomorrow, and There are ways to expedite it, but it's still going to take a little while. So, real quick, I'm going to show you the person that okay, one thing very quickly. To me, the most important thing is to sing lines that you think would sound good, okay? And then learn, because everybody has music inside of them. It's this thing that makes it hard to get it out, you know? That you don't have to be a good singer. Like, don't care about your pitch or your tone or whatever. But if you don't mind, again, G7. So now, so what I'm going to try to do is first sing, and eventually, now I've done this a lot, so don't be discouraged if you try this at home. But I'm trying, eventually I'll try to play with what I'm singing. And it's a nanosecond after what's coming out of here. So it's not like you've worked up a bunch of lines and you're singing to those for an effect. You're trying to connect what's in here and here to these, you know, so that it feels like the instrument's just another part of your, you know, being. It's not like like you have to work out everything. All right, so here we go. Right? So I'm trying to play every single note, if I can, you know, with my voice. Now, the way you do that is at first you just have to practice humming or singing or whistling or whatever you like to do just by itself. And see if you have a couple good ideas that sound kind of like jazz or kind of musical. Once you find one or two that you like, stop and see if you can learn it on your instrument. You know, that's a really important part. Just stop right there, and it once again helps if you record this, because then you can go back and listen to it, and then you figure out the fingering and all that for some lines that came from you. You know, now where do you get your inspiration for these? Once again, back to listening. You know, if you're listening to the great players, eventually you'll pick up on a lot of that.